Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I am Jason, a guy that has got to surrender to the idea that I need to accept things.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
I'm Caroline. I'm also a person in long-term recovery.
And you are a listener saying, why the fuck are they doing a second spiritual principle this month? In fact, they're doing 2, so they're really doing 3 this month. And what the fuck is wrong with them? And I'm going to say, I don't know. We missed a month of spiritual principles somehow along the way. I just noticed it the other day, like March, I think. We just didn't fucking do it. We were like, nah, fuck spiritual principles. We don't want them. So I was like, well, let's just do an extra one and fit it in. That way we have a nice round 24 by the time we're done. And then we're not going to, because we're doing 2 today, because I don't know the difference between acceptance and surrender. And I'm not sure there is. And I hope somebody can clarify what that is. I'm surprised it's not in that book you're reading, Billy, the Atlas of the Heart, with all the different definitions and the nuance and everything.
It may be in there, but I have the audio book, and I didn't feel like trying to look it up. Looking shit up on audiobooks is difficult sometimes.
I have the coffee table hardback version of that book.
That's not going to be easy to search either.
Oh, no, it is.
You can't control F your coffee table.
That's true, but there's an index and a glossary. It's a very pretty book.
I do like technology for some things.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's just start with trying to define these, I guess, spiritual principles. So acceptance and surrender, 2 we hear frequently in the programs, that we recover in. Acceptance, what I found definition-wise, there was a ton, but I found willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation, which I don't think is the only thing acceptance is, but fit part of it.
Yeah, that fits part of it, yeah.
Yeah, and then another piece, and this really pissed me off, that a lot of acceptance was referring back to accept, and then you look up accept.
I know, I kept finding that too.
Yeah, but usually when you look up the root word, that's it. They don't have any more of that bullshit. And when you look up accept, it says the act of accepting. And I'm like, this is bullshit. This is backwards.
I'm not accepting this.
Right. Not surrendering to this being the answer, goddammit. But for accept, I came up with to endure without protest or reaction. I don't know. I was really struggling to find good definitions of these. I know Billy usually looks them up. What'd you come up with?
Yeah, the best one I came up with was the act of believing.
Wow.
Like, okay.
I like that better.
I mean, it simplifies it to a degree where you're like, okay, that.
I don't know that would have meant shit to me in my first 3 weeks clean though. I'd be like, back to believing what? Right. Fuck does that even mean? So what do you think acceptance is? I mean, to me, it's like the practice of allowing what is to be. I guess that's what I think when I think of how to try it.
Yeah. So what do I think? Like acceptance. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's just believing something to be true, like learning something and believing it to be true.
That's interesting. So while I think that does fit what I do when I'm trying to practice acceptance, don't think I'd ever think of it that way. That's fascinating. So in my mind, okay, something happens. Billy walks over here and smacks me or flicks my ear or something just to pick on me, right? And everything that comes up inside of me is my lack of acceptance of it, right? I want to push back. I want to tell you that's wrong. I want to say you should never do things like that. I want to argue that I'm really hurt but none of it is just the acceptance piece would be, oh, that happened. That's acceptance. That has already happened. I can't go back and change it, which is all my energy inside is trying to change that it shouldn't have been. And acceptance is okay, that is. And so to me, that sounds like believing in something, you're talking about. Or believing it to be true, I guess.
Yeah. Or are we accepting that we have been wronged? Not accepting that it actually happened, but accepting that someone just hurt us? Whatever.
Almost like accepting the possibility that I will be wronged in life.
Right.
This is going to happen to you. It's not nice. It's not kind. It's going to feel shitty, but can you accept that this is going to be part of your existence?
Yeah.
From time to time.
Like that would fit into acceptance for me. Like bad things are going to happen in my life. Like, okay. I don't like it, or whatever.
Right.
Like, it's not a matter of whether I like it or not, really. It's just that is a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I be okay that this is? Because it already is. I'm the one fighting against it. What do you think, Caroline? What do you got?
Yeah, I think that's the key component. It's the believing something, but then being okay with it. Accepting is like not fight. For me, accepting is the choice to not fight against something.
I feel like that's where this definition that I found kind of fit for me. It was like willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation. And in my mind, I guess what it's missing there is like the second piece of what the accept definition was, to endure without protest or reaction. And that's like, okay, I'm okay with it. I don't have to protest it. I don't have to be pushing back against it. I can say it is. I don't like it. That's it.
Endure, I think, is the piece of that definition that I struggle with, because when I'm enduring something, I'm still having that like negative frame,
So, and that's a little bit of a conversation that I've never been able to reconcile in myself. It's like, if I accept something, does that mean I have to be happy with it?
Happy or okay are two
Neutral.
different things. Neutral.
Is neutral okay?
And I guess for me, it's... Can I say that I accept something if I'm still angry or mad about it? Like, does that mean I really accepted it?
I would say no, personally.
Right. And that's why the endure feels like it's that like...
Yeah, but I'm wondering if that's a human take on the word endure. Like, have we given that the negative connotation that it means to put up with when we don't like it? Because I need to endure things I like too, right? Isn't that just the definition? Like, isn't endure a neutral definition?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Or
But
like
I
when you
see
think
what
of
you're saying.
endurance, doesn't seem like a bad trait to have. Like,
Right. That's
Right.
you
true.
have endurance, that's kind of a positive.
Yeah. I can have the endurance to run 10 miles and maybe I
Right.
enjoy that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, but there's still a piece of that I'm like, yeah, but I have to endure it because it's hard. Okay, that's one I don't know. I don't know if we're putting that on there now. What about surrender, though? How does that conceptualize in your brain? And at whatever level, does it feel, before we get into this, different than acceptance to you? Because I don't know. I'm like, surrender feels kind of like the same thing. I'm allowing what is to be to me.
So I had never really, to be honest, never really thought much about what the difference of the two things was. And now I can't get away from what I already read. So this is going to be out of stuff that I already read.
That's fair.
But surrender had more to do with giving up control or power over something. Like, when I surrender to my addiction, when I surrender to my disease, what it means is I give up the idea that I have any sort of control over it. Like I stopped trying to fight against it.
Right. I feel like I would get to that same place if I was trying to accept what I could see as truths in my life at that point, right? Like if I could accept, okay, I keep trying to use successfully and it keeps not working, so now I must accept that I don't have any power over the way I use. And then that goes back to, I'm like, well, that's surrender.
Yeah, and so what I
But
came...
surrender's the next step of that.
Yeah, and what I came across was that surrendering requires acceptance plus some other stuff.
Okay.
Like so acceptance is a piece of surrender that you need. You need to accept it and then,
then
relinquish
action
your
it.
control, right? Or relinquish your idea that you have power over it.
So I was trying to think of like an analogy for the difference between the two, because I do feel like there is a difference, but I was struggling with what that difference was.
Can I ask this before you give the analogy?
Sure.
So and I'm curious because you might have different takes on this, is the take that acceptance is a lower intensity level of surrender and that you must do acceptance in order to do surrender, but not so much the opposite? Or is it that acceptance is one piece of what could be in surrender, but not necessarily encompassing all the same stuff?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay, so you guys think it's one piece of it, but there's other parts that go into the surrender thing. It's not just like, oh, when I've accepted it at this 20%, I'm accepting, but then when I get to 80%, I'm surrendering.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, I was thinking back to, so when I was using, I came to a point in my using where I had exposure to 12 steps and rehabs and the disease philosophy for addiction, I remember getting high and sitting around talking to the people I was using with about how we were addicts and how, we have this disease. So I had acceptance at that point.
Is that acceptance or resignation? And this is where another word comes in, because I read this one all morning too.
Yeah, that's the whole...
Yeah, resignation, I think, is a little... Because that's giving up
hope.
Hope, right?
Right,
yeah.
Which is what I feel like y'all were doing.
Well, no, I hadn't given up hope yet. I just knew I didn't have the willingness to do anything about the fact that I was an addict.
That's resignation, though, right?
Nah, I felt like I would eventually have that willingness. Just didn't right there. I wasn't willing to do anything about it. I had accepted the fact that I was an addict. I had this disease.
Okay.
It was a problem, and that the solution was X.
Right.
But I didn't have the willingness to do the solution. So for me, the surrender came when I was willing to enact the solution.
I feel like, and I guess this is where, like, there's those differences between each individual. Like, I remember coming to that point, sure, of resignation of like, yeah, I'm an addict. I don't disagree with it. It's just shit I can do about it. This is my life. But I did not think of any like future hope of like, oh, I'll figure it out one day. I was like, no, this is my lot. This is what I do. Okay. And that was resignation.
Yeah. And see, I had this optimist, informed by nothing other than like my own sense of like infallibility, probably, that like eventually I'd be able to, when I wanted to, I'd be able to do something about it. You know, like I wasn't ready to stop using at that point, but I always kind of operated under this belief that like eventually I'd be ready to stop using, and then I'd do these things and I'd get clean and it would be fine. And I was very fortunate that turned out to be the case. I later learned that for so many that's not it was not nearly as easy as it seemed like it would be in my mind.
I don't know, but the surrender definition I ended up finding, because they all were pretty rough and usually dealt with war and military, and this one did too, but cease resistance to an enemy or opponent and submit to their authority. And
I don't like that.
I don't like it at all, but I do feel like that's kind of what we did to get in recovery.
The authority being the 12-step program?
Well, it was weird. It's like we had to cease resisting, at the time, I guess I was calling it the disease or addiction or drugs or whatever, but then also submit to a different authority, which doesn't quite match this definition, right? We didn't submit to the disease's authority necessarily. Like, I think we were already doing that. This was like the next surrender of submitting to something else's authority. And I don't know. It just feels weird.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I guess that was a part of it, was surrendering my will, to recovery.
I think so too. And I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
That's all right. No, that was bad.
Oh, well, I was just thinking like in reading this definition today, like right now to you guys, and thinking about that, I'm like, is that okay? So I had surrendered my will, so to speak, to the addiction or whatever was going on, and that was just looked awful because there was terrible outcomes, right? It was running the show and it was bad. And then I do think, and I think Billy has said this to me a billion times, and I'm like, I'm not so sure. At least the way it worked when I went in and surrendered to this other set of ideals, that shit worked really, really well for a time too.
At least better.
Right. It was definitely a better thing to submit to, right? But it does, and I guess in my mind, raise the question when, if ever, and I think the wisdom I've been given, it doesn't happen this way, but in my mind, I think it does. But when do we get to stop giving our submitting to this authority, or at least differentiating, right? And I think that's a piece I might have missed along the way that I didn't do. Like, I stopped differentiating between what I was submitting to and started to get kind of frustrated that some of the things I felt like I was submitting to in the practice of the program, or maybe they aren't program practices, but whatever. It didn't feel like it was the answer anymore. And I think I missed the switch of, oh, wait, at some point I'm supposed to move this again, right? Like originally I'm submitting to the addiction, then I'm submitting to the program, and at some point I need to move over and submit to my personal form of higher power. And I never did that. I think I was still following the program, and I'm like, this shit ain't working for me.
Right. Well, and there are ideals within the program even now that I struggle with, that aren't necessarily like as a 12-step member, I'm not like, I buy in wholeheartedly without questioning any of what we do.
Well,
like,
obviously, you're on
some
this
of what we
podcast.
do is a little, I don't know. I mean, just the other night I was at a meeting and somebody said something. I'm like, I think you're completely wrong.
Right.
I don't think that's true at all. And, but I'm okay with that because my will now is more in alignment with what I think my higher power's will is and spiritual principles and all that stuff. And, if I'm asked, I'm willing to give my opinion or to tell that person that they're wrong. But they had the floor or whatever, and it wasn't my place to judge them. But I don't necessarily go in and just wholeheartedly surrender to be like, well, whatever they say in here is the way that it is. Like, man, I think we might have this piece a little bit wrong.
So, in your guys' take, was surrender being a bigger thing and acceptance being a piece of that? What else all goes into the surrender that's not in the acceptance? Like
surrender to me feels more like an action that happens. I don't want to say kind of like a decision. You know what I mean? Like all right, I'm going to make a decision almost as if it was in battle. Like in battle, you make a decision. Like, all right, we're getting our ass kicked. We can keep fighting to the bitter end, or we can just decide, okay, we're done now. We give up. And that seems a little different than acceptance, where acceptance feels a little more like a, I don't know, peaceful acceptance of ideas. It's not like I'm beaten to submission and have to make a one-time surrender. It's like I just accept it, and it just is the way that it is. I'm not fighting against it anymore.
Yeah, it's the mental piece versus the like tangible action piece. I feel like I love that analogy you just made, Billy, of the war, and you're getting your butt kicked, and the realization that we're losing is the acceptance. Like once you've said, okay, like we're losing men, this is going down, we're not going to win this one. That's the acceptance. And then the surrender is, okay, we're going to stop fighting.
You want me to read you something that's really pretty that says that they're different and confuse the shit out of me?
Yes, but can I ask this question first? I'm just curious, though, like, can you, and I feel like the answer is going to be yes, but I just can't picture it, I guess. So in that scenario, okay, I come to the acceptance point. We're losing men. Is there the possibility of accepting that and not doing something? Like, I feel like you're going to do something from there. Once you accept it, you have to do something. That something may be bury your head in the sand and go in denial, but like you're basically facing two choices. So maybe the acceptance is I'm owning this, and I know, and like maybe the surrender is I'm not going to go into denial about it. I'm going to do something about it instead.
I think the surrender requires some level of hope, because if you don't have hope, then you just accept your fate and say, this is what it is. We're losing. We're going to lose men until we're all dead.
So acceptance is resignation if it doesn't have hope involved. And if it does have hope involved, it's surrender.
Surrender still requires the action, but you need the hope to take the action, or you're not going to take the action.
Okay. Let's read this beautiful poem.
So this is off Tiny Buddha. This gets back to what you were just talking about. And it says, surrender equals complete acceptance of what is, plus faith that all is well, even without my input. It is not about inaction. So
maybe acceptance is Billy flicked my ear, but surrender is Billy flicked my ear, and I'm not sure why, but somehow that is going to work out good for him and I. Yeah. Like maybe you flicked my ear and then we have a budgeting relationship because I said, hey, Billy, why'd you flick my ear? That was kind of weird. It didn't feel so good. And then we talk and we're like, oh, my God, we're close to the same age and we got similar lifestyles. And you know what I mean? Like to me, it felt like when you read that surrender had to have a piece of understanding that all is right in the world just as it is, even when it doesn't feel good for me.
Okay. And now I'll try to confuse you even more.
Go for it. I love it.
This is off of
Not So Tiny Buddha.
Creative Purpose. Yeah, Creative Purpose had a blog about acceptance and surrender. And it says, acceptance is immediate and personal. It is the act of being present with what is happening without attaching our well-being to it. Acceptance is akin to acquiescence. It leads to equanimity in any circumstance.
So I actually came across that website this morning.
I
and
found
was
that one
like,
too.
I will have to look up these 5 words before I talk about it.
I don't know
what acquiesce. Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to skip that website.
And then surrender is timeless and universal.
Yeah.
It is the sense that what is happening is part of a process and continuum. To surrender is to go with, not against. Surrender cultivates tranquility and sees our situation in a greater context.
So I don't disagree with any of that. I don't know that it's easy to talk about from there. But what that felt like was, in this moment, as Billy flicks my ear, acceptance would be, Billy flicked my ear. Without any thoughts of whether that was good for me or bad
Or
for
any
me, good
judgments.
for me or bad
Right.
for Billy. It's just what is. Billy flicked my ear. That's acceptance right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then surrendered in that sounded more like this grand scheme of life. Like, well, okay, Billy flicked my ear. That must be something I needed, and it's going to all work out in the way it's supposed to. Or, it's going to be, it's done right without me telling it it's wrong. Basically.
Or it's like I'm deciding that it's okay and that it happened without me needing to do something to fix it or make it better. It doesn't require my input or action to correct a wrong.
Yeah. If I go out here, like my little tire inflation thing came on driving here this morning. If I go out here and have a flat tire, it's going to suck, right? I don't want to have to change my tire before I go home. But the surrender would be just, okay, I need to change this tire, and this is okay. Like, this happens to people.
Right, without
Why
fighting
is that
against
not the acceptance, though?
Because the acceptance is right here in the moment that this is just happening. My tire is flat. And then the surrender pulls in the piece of, I don't think that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with my tire being flat. It's supposed to be this way. It's not like the anti what life's supposed to be. It's actually part of what life's supposed to be, is the surrender, I feel like.
That's very different than what we were just saying about surrender requiring action. We've just landed on 2 very different definitions of surrender.
Yeah, we have. I don't know if there is a very clear definition. I think these are very, does that require any, the action, I guess, is bringing in this core belief piece of there's nothing wrong with the way the world works.
Well, I think with your flat tire analogy, like, it's only surrender if you're like angry and fighting against it. If you just walk out and look at the tire and go, oh, my tire's flat, I need to change it, then there's no surrender needed in that situation. You don't need to practice surrender there. You've already accepted it. So there isn't a surrender required.
I don't disagree
surrender
with
would
that.
be required if you walked out and went, fuck, my fucking tire's flat, and I don't want to deal with this, and this is bullshit, and I'm not changing this tire, and then surrender would be accepted.
Is surrender
required.
the process of coming to acceptance then?
Well, I think you
Surrender,
need
that
acceptance
verb.
to surrender to something. Like, acceptance needs to be a part of the surrender process.
Huh.
You can
I'm
accept
confused
something
now.
without having to surrender to it. But you can't surrender to something without accepting it first.
Yeah, but I feel like in the acceptance of the tire, I wasn't putting any value judgments on in order for it to be acceptance. I was just saying the tire's flat. So if I do have anger and shit, then I'm not accepting it either.
Correct. That's where the surrender would be giving up the anger. Once you've surrendered, then the acceptance can come in, and you can do what's...
But that feels like the opposite of 10 minutes ago, when surrender was just a minor portion of, or acceptance was a minor portion of surrender, because surrender needed something else to be that. But now we have to get to surrender
minor portion,
before
but
we're
it's a
to
portion,
acceptance?
yeah.
Okay, I'm confused.
I'm confused as well.
I don't know.
So I guess the way I think of it is now, because I felt like this cleared me up. So, yeah, I can, if I accept something, then no surrender is required. Like, if I walk in and go, oh, Jason, your hat is black, there's nothing that I need to surrender to in that situation. Now, if you told me your hat was brown and I said, no, your fucking hat is black, I'm looking at it and it's black. What was that? The brown and green dress or whatever, that shit, and people would argue about it. It's like the surrender would be me relinquishing what I believe or giving up some sort of preconceived idea or notion. Acceptance is just, it's whatever color you think it is. I don't really care. So I can accept something and not have to surrender to anything.
So within that framework, if we come back to the war analogy and losing the war.
You can accept that you're losing the war and not surrender and still continue to fight until every single person is dead.
Right.
And you've lost the war.
But you're saying that you can surrender without...
No, I'm saying you can't surrender until you accept the fact that you're losing the war.
No, but you're saying if you already have the acceptance, there's no surrender required. So if you already are accepting that you're losing the war, you don't need to surrender?
Well, now you're taking a physical action of surrendering and equating that with a principle of surrendering. Those are kind of
and
two
that's
different
where
words.
It's getting
the
messed
words
up.
Are getting parsed there. The act of surrendering in a battle, if we called that giving up in the battle, let's call it giving up, then you would say you could give up in the battle. You would need to surrender in order to go give up. I don't know. Using that surrender kind of twisted it up there.
Yeah, and I had this website you were just reading from. To surrender is to go with, not against. That feels relevant. But I feel like that's acceptance too. Or maybe acceptance is more neutral. Maybe acceptance is to just say it is. And then surrender is to go with it. Somewhere on here I found...
I like that. That's very simple.
Yeah,
it's very
that's
simple.
Okay. So I was reading some analogy of like being in a stream, right? And that's kind of how I've always thought of like these concepts in general, right? Like I can be the leaf in the stream that's saying I need to go upstream the whole time I'm going downstream, or I can be the leaf in the stream going where the stream takes me.
Or you could be swimming in the direction of the stream, and that's the surrender.
Yeah, so that's what I would think. Like if I'm, okay, maybe not a leaf because that's hard to think, right? If I put a boat in the water and I'm a canoe, right? I'm paddling along. I can be paddling upstream, which is just like denial and fighting life. I can just be letting it go where it takes me and like banging on rocks and shit like that. That's acceptance. Or I can be trying to like navigate with the water. And that would be surrender?
I think, yeah.
Is that what we're all thinking?
I think 'cause that's the go with.
Yeah.
Go with the flow
Right.
of water as opposed to it is. So it's going to carry me along and I'm not going to fight against it, but I'm not going to enable it.
Well, and acceptance feels like it's very, I don't want to say willy-nilly, but it's almost like I'm accepting it, but there's nothing that's happening because of that. Not to say that it's a bad practice, but just there's no necessary growth from that. I could also say I don't give a fuck, and that's acceptance. Whereas surrender feels more like I'm actually making a decision to do something with that information.
Right. Yeah, that gets closer to the way I'm thinking of it, too. It's like,
okay.
The surrender, it requires me, letting go of control or giving up some idea, preconceived idea or notion or something. Whereas acceptance is just, it is what it is.
How do you feel like these concepts have assisted you in your recovery? Whether that's early recovery or is there places you've been where you felt like you struggled with acceptance or surrender, but then, there was some kind of process that went on? When have you noticed these in your recovery time?
Ooh, I don't know that I've ever really thought real deeply about parsing the words out.
Well, it's just
separately.
either really,
So,
or together, or I get it. I hadn't defined them before this either, but just thinking about those ideas of either one, right? When we come to terms with or maybe when we're struggling to see a thing and just let it be what it is, when has that really thrown you off course in your life? I feel like all the time for me.
Well, yeah, and I'm the foundation of what I sort of believe requires an acceptance that I don't always know what's best for me, and that I make bad decisions for myself, and that if I'm not real careful, I don't consider other people around me. And the fact that that's acceptance now means I don't fight against that. I get into situations and I go, oh yeah, I got to be careful because my decisions aren't always the best. Where there used to be a time where I would be like, I fucking know what's best for me, and these people don't know, and maybe I'll do what they want me to do, but I don't like it, But yeah, I'm constantly reminding myself I have to accept the idea that, like, I'm not good at making decisions for myself a lot of times, at least not in my own head. The shit I tell myself is suspect.
It's interesting. So, like, I guess when I'm thinking, there is that surrender for sure. I guess the piece I was thinking of where maybe I'm thinking where I don't necessarily do it well is when things happen in life, like life on life's terms, what we hear all the time. And like, I struggle to accept that that's what's supposed to be happening.
Right.
I'm like, you weren't supposed to cut me off in traffic, you asshole, or you're not supposed to be riding up my ass. And so it's hard for me in that moment when I'm feeling physically attacked in a way. Like when people drive up my ass, it impacts me. Like it gives me a lot of anxiety, right? And so it gets hard for me to accept that that's what's supposed to be happening to me. And I'm like, in that moment, that's where I feel like I struggle the most with not having acceptance and surrender. And that's where
a surrender is needed to bring you to the point of acceptance.
Right. Because I accepted they're up my ass, but
right.
No, see, I feel like I do it backwards though. Because I feel like I accept that they're there, but it doesn't change anything.
Right.
I'm like,
well, see, and the surrender would be the act of letting go of whatever it is you think they shouldn't be on your ass, or it's disrespectful, or whatever else. The surrender would be saying, hey, guess what? If they want to ride on my ass, I don't care.
And that's where I'm working towards. Like now the process is, okay, I know this causes me anxiety. So I'm going to I actually frequently move my rearview mirror so I can't see them. And I breathe and I look at the horizon in front of me. And I'm like, if they want to be mad, they can be, but I'm not taking it on. Mm-hmm. And that's like where I'm at with it. But yeah, I feel like that's been one of my main struggles in my recovery is just kind of letting things be what they are and thinking that's okay. Like I have a hard time thinking that's okay. I'm like, no, it's wrong. Somebody's got to fix it. Where's the judge at? We got to get somebody in here to advocate for me or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting because as soon as you went to supposed to, my initial thought is there is no supposed to.
Then why do we all get mad when shit happens?
I think it's different for different reasons, but we all have there's unwritten societal norms that we all sort of subscribe to, but they vary slightly, like they're not exactly the same. But in general, most of them are close. You know what I mean? Like most people feel like tailgating is sort of rude and disrespectful and don't appreciate it.
Doesn't seem like a driving around. Doesn't feel like most people agree to that. I don't know.
Well, and there was a time where I did that a lot because I felt like I could push people up the road. Like I need to go faster. You need to go faster because I need to go faster.
Oh, I go slower.
Yeah.
Well,
it doesn't work.
It works with some people.
Now I don't tailgate at all, but that's been just a personal growth thing of I am going to get there when I get there.
So tailgating has always gotten me three things. Either people do speed up, which I see frequently because their anxiety gets to them, or there's the people who are more stubborn and they're like, fuck that, I'm going to slow down. And I'm like, cool, you're going slow enough to go around now. That's great too. And then there's the times when I can't get around and I'm just pissed for however long it is.
Right.
That's not a good one at all.
Well, I think sometimes the tailgating when they speed up, it's because they didn't realize they were sometimes that happens to me where I don't even realize that I'm going maybe a little under the speed limit, and then I see someone on my butt and I'm like, shit.
Yeah, right.
Speed limit's 50 and I'm going 45. Yeah, so if it's just an acceptance thing, they didn't even, or awareness rather than acceptance, I think. But I think from going back to that supposed to thing, for whatever reason, when you said that, it triggered in me this preordained God's plan supposed to type thing. And I don't know why that's where my head went, but when you're like, this is not supposed to be happening.
I tend to think that's what all anger is the statement that wasn't supposed to happen. I think it's all we wouldn't be angry if it was supposed to be, right? We would just accept it. I kind of think every anger is, this isn't supposed to be happening. It's a pushback against it. And I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, never thought much about that. I mean, it sounds right at the moment.
Yeah. I feel like that's definitely where all my anger comes from, is how could this be?
Yeah.
How
if
could
we were
this
at
be
a point
existing?
of surrender and acceptance, we would never be angry.
Right,
We would just
right.
be like, oh, this is what it is. I don't need to, place my judgments and values on it.
So I came across this article, and it talks about acceptance and surrender. Many spiritual teachings talk about the idea of dropping into the flow of the moment, the ability to meet life just as it is, and therefore come into an acceptance of what the present moment brings you. So what about surrendering to life and to our experiences? Is this the same as acceptance? Somewhat, yes. But for me, the writer of this, surrendering to life and experiences brings with it the deeper aspects of your innermost knowing, true faith and complete trust that you are truly part of source energy. Oh, this is getting real good for you guys. It's like a whole body being experience from love, acceptance, trust, faith, and belief in knowing who you are and that you are safe, taken care of, and all is well. It's living from the quality, quotes, of acceptance with non-judgment and an open heart and mind, but also a true openness to allowing that source, light, love, and energy to flow through you. There you go. That's, if you think of your higher power as source energy. Surrender, therefore, to this writer is deeper than acceptance and yet encompasses acceptance. With acceptance, you meet and connect with the reality of this moment. With surrender, you transcend the ego and connect with something bigger. You experience the oneness and therefore feel the encompassing acceptance of all on many levels.
You found that one too.
Yeah.
We had the same.
Yeah. Well, it was
Google
only like
search
3 or
results.
4 good ones here. I don't know. What do you make of that? Like this idea that this is kind of saying that acceptance is a moment-to-moment thing, whereas surrender is more of like a way of life or belief in the world, I feel like is what it's trying to say.
Hey, I really liked the acceptance is what is and surrender is going with it as a very simplistic and easy to understand definition. And I no longer wish to explore any other definitions.
It gets, the
am not
nuances
surrendering.
of some of these words get pretty difficult, and I believe that's a part of why we have a problem communicating sometimes about these principles, because they are so intertwined and nuanced to the situations. I never even really thought, I'm I don't know, they're the same thing, really. That's what I always thought. They're just the same thing, and they're
really
almost
coming into this, you thought
pretty much.
that was your instinct. My instinct was
really...
they feel similar, but they are different. Although I was having a really hard time verbalizing how they were different.
Right, and that's what I was trying to look through the basic text to see what it says. The Narcotics Anonymous basic text.
Do they use them interchangeably? I bet they do.
Wouldn't doubt it.
They don't. It's acceptance is the key to freedom and shit like that. There's not a good explanation. I'm not finding a good explanation of what they mean. Actually, it's you just need to do them.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair for most of these spiritual principles. We use them as if we already know what they are, rather than actually speaking about what they are within our text. And maybe world service. That's a shout out or a hint that we need another piece of literature that defines all of our spiritual principles.
They have one called the Spiritual Principle a Day book. A new one that's out.
Okay.
They made that in response to this podcast.
Yes.
They thought we were going to pilfer all their members and get their dollars in the basket instead. I just asked ChatGPT, if you've never heard of that. It's the AI thing that everybody's going crazy about right now, what the difference was, and this is what I got. So, acceptance refers to acknowledging and embracing a situation or circumstances as it is without resistance or judgment. We kind of already heard that. It involves recognizing and coming to terms with the reality of a situation, whether it is favorable or unfavorable. Acceptance does not necessarily imply liking or approving of the situation, but rather finding more inner peace and willingness to move forward despite the challenges. Surrender, on the other hand, goes beyond acceptance. It involves relinquishing control and resistance, allowing oneself to fully let go and trust in a higher power or a greater wisdom. Surrender often entails a sense of surrendering personal will and ego, and it can be seen as a form of submission or yielding to a force larger than oneself. It is about releasing attachment to outcomes and surrendering to the flow of life. That's
interesting.
kind of what we're saying. I
It
guess.
almost feels like surrender has a spiritual component that maybe isn't there with acceptance.
Well, and then it has a summary paragraph, which I wasn't going to read, but the last sentence is, acceptance is more focused on internal acceptance, while surrender emphasizes the external aspect of releasing control, which is interesting because that's, I don't know. That feels internal too, to release control. I don't know. Very fascinating, I guess, that there's not much difference. And maybe that's what the problem is, that I think over the years and years and years, we've started to use a lot of these words that are similar very interchangeably in our dialogues. Like people like me who, my father told me, listen, if you read a lot, you will increase your vocabulary. And what you do is every time you come across a word you don't know, you look it up in a dictionary. Great idea. I followed half of it. I read a lot and I learned words and I said, I know what these mean from context clues. So I never looked them up. So I am that guy that has been using words interchangeably just based on something close. Mm-hmm. And over the years and years, at some point, it's like, do we really even know that we're talking about different concepts anymore? And does it matter? And do we need to figure out how to do that? Because, we are kind of like all stuck on, these words just kind of mean that thing over there in that group. And there's no nuance to trying to say what we're really trying to say anymore, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find I have a rather broad vocabulary, and I find that I'll be in situations where I'll use a word and whomever I'm speaking with doesn't know the word, and they'll say, what does that word mean? And I'll kind of try to define it, but a lot of times I'm like, let's look it up, because I know how I know how I'm using it, but I even in knowing the correct way to use a word, I can't always actually define the word. And I would say 80% of the time I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I was going for, but not always. I mean, there is that 20% of the time where it's like, oh, that's actually a little bit different than how I was using it. So it's probably that learning from my environment rather than learning from the book.
I can tell you where I did this yesterday. I know you're getting ready to talk, but I was talking about hearing somebody above the din. Some word I read in 1950s books, right? And I was talking to my wife and we were talking. I was like, what does din even mean? It just doesn't even sound like a word now that I said it out loud, right? And so in my mind, it was like the background noise, right? It was like if you were sitting in a coffee shop, it was the noise of the machines making coffee, the people talking, this, that, and the other. That's what I've always thought it was. But I literally just looked it up because I was curious and I didn't yesterday. And it says it's a loud, unpleasant, and prolonged noise. Oh. Which isn't really background noise.
No.
And it talks about repetition in every version of the definition. So I have had this one wrong for many, many years.
And I mean, that's the colloquial definition is what exactly what you define.
Exactly. So that makes it a struggle not only to talk about these concepts, but to really find them in our life and to point to them and to say, this is where I'm at and what I'm doing when we're kind of confused across the board. Am I resigned to this? Am I surrendering? Am I accepting? I don't even know which stage I'm in because we just kind of throw these words out there and call it a day.
And I think that's kind of, we talked a little bit about the Atlas of the Heart book by Brene Brown earlier. I think that's a little bit of the logic behind why she wrote that book, is just to get everybody kind of on the same page talking about the same thing. I think in the foreword of the book, and Billy, you can correct me if you've listened to this more recently than I've read it, it's kind of that if you can't identify these things, you can't use them as an asset.
Yeah, that's it. Jason and I actually were just talking about this yesterday, and I was telling him that's what the book was about. It was she's trying to get us to think a little more deeply about our feelings and to dig into that nuance, because that nuance matters, and which principles we need to apply in different situations, like that matters. Do I need to practice acceptance here, or do I need to surrender here? And what's the difference? And does, what do these words even fucking mean? Like,
Right.
what action is required on my part to grow and change and be better in this situation?
And I think we're coming to a lot. I'm sorry, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. We're coming to a lot more of that in the therapy world, right? And bringing some of these ideas into the show at times, like we use these words like clean and this, that, and the other, and addiction, and what meaning do they have as a society to us now, and what damage are they doing in the way we use them? And we're starting to notice that there is a lot of nuance in these words. And I can share from my personal experience, which this isn't like researched or anything, but when I'm talking to people and I introduce them to an idea, something that seems like everybody already knows it, like if this person does this to you, that's not nice, and you're going to hurt, right? Like, and they seem shocked by it. And you can see almost where they were, no, my childhood was perfect. And then you point out this thing and say, well, imagine if you did that to this person. Wouldn't that be really painful? And then like it just hits them. And it's almost like they didn't know it hurt them because they weren't aware that it could. You know what I mean? So it's almost like giving people the language gives them the ability to feel the feeling at times, which is really fucking eerie. But I think it does speak to this thing of like, it is kind of important that we use the right words and that we have nuance in our language. And, how is that limiting our ability to grow and move forward like this book is talking about? But also, where are we still using that language and it's causing damage, and we're kind of like not looking at it because we've just done it that way for a long time.
Yeah, and I don't know why you're talking about this. I don't know if this would fit into a thing, but I'm like, for acceptance and surrender, I'm thinking, all right, so I look at my childhood and I say, yeah, I can accept the fact that my childhood wasn't great and there were some bad things that happened. And then the surrender piece is like, no, you were abused as a child. Like, that's a much deeper, like that requires me to let go of some preconceived ideas or to turn over something, that's a little.
Yeah. So like in that, it's almost like acceptance is, yeah, this happened and it wasn't cool, but life, that's how it is. And whereas the surrender in that, or at least what we're calling the surrender in that, would look more like, damn, I was really fucked up, and I might actually have to look into like talking to people about that and maybe healing from it. Like there might be more to do about that, except just saying,
here than
fuck it, that's part of life. I guess my kids will deal with theirs too,
Right.
What I can say, these terms being different, or whether we have them correctly or incorrectly defined here or sorted out in the few different ways we tried to do that, I do think both of these concepts, whether I can tell you exactly what they are hugely important in my life at this point. I think there have been things I've been trying to work towards and maybe have had different levels of along the way that have assisted me in my recovery. But I think they are huge pieces of my recovery today. Like, it is really a lot for me. Can I accept this thing that's happening to me? Like, I actually think this is the challenge I have on my day-to-day basis. It's can I be okay that life is the way it is? And can I have that life be the way it is and find a way to get through it without being miserable about it being the way it is? Like, this is what I fucking wake up every morning thinking, God, I gotta do that some more today, because it feels good when I can,
And I don't mean this to sound sexist, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that, I think, is a male concept of like, I need to fight against what is wrong and stand up for, injustice. And if somebody's treating me bad, like, I need to fucking let them know, like, that male part of you, right? And that feels like what you're supposed to do. But what I've found is through surrender and acceptance, like, it leads me more to peace and more to harmony in my life and to less conflict and confrontation. And ultimately, that's what I want out of my life, is less conflict, more peace, more tranquility, more freedom, and these concepts of surrender and acceptance lead more to those things.
I feel like what it does for me, especially in the beginning of just trying to remember to do it, is it separates me out of what's going on enough to be able to say, okay, my goal is to accept and surrender to what this thing happening around me is, and then lets me know that as the separate piece that is experiencing a lot of discomfort around that thing that's happening, that's the thing I need to work on. Right? It's not the stuff out here that's creating the discomfort. The discomfort is actually the goal of where I need to go, right? So for me, just the act of like accepting and surrendering reminds me, oh, wait, the discomfort's in me. That's where I got to look and tend to, not all the shit out here that I want to be different so that it'll feel different for me.
And now we're looping in powerlessness.
Yes, yes. Resignation, powerlessness, surrender, acceptance. Same shit. Just some tips that I came across. It says every morning you can set an intention to allow acceptance and surrender to life. When you meet a situation, you can turn to your body and see what's going on inside of it out of curiosity instead of just, going with whatever that thing is coming up. Can spend 5 to 10 minutes each day in a relaxed meditative space. Imagine that. Meditation's good for this. Go outside in nature more. Tap into silence. That's all meditative stuff. Breathe into the center of your chest. Sounds like pretty standard tips for how to mess with a dysregulated nervous system, which makes sense to me. Anybody got any other thoughts about how to cultivate acceptance and surrender?
Gosh,
How do
no.
you
I mean, I had to
practice-
get into step work to even learn what those words mean.
Yeah. And how do you practice being okay with shit that you're not okay with? That's the whole point. I'm just going to sit here and be okay with it. Like, I don't know if that's it. Talk about it,
Yeah.
maybe. Call that buddy that can hear you.
Well, I think for me, it's like the reverse happened. Like I learned what these words were, learned that there were benefits to practicing them in my life, and then slowly was like, all right, well, let's try to like accept this situation and just see what the fuck happens, because I'm pretty angry and I want to let somebody know about it.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think acceptance at this point, for me anyway, intuitively feels better. And I don't know about the surrender piece. Like, it's funny because when you brought this up, Jason, I was like, oh, they're different. But then there's a lot of times I can look back over my life and say, these things have happened that I've had to come to a place of acceptance with. But I wouldn't say that about surrender. That's not something I actively consciously attempt to achieve, whereas I do very actively consciously attempt to achieve acceptance. And I don't know why one but not the other, and that I don't want to go down that road necessarily, but just thinking about the job loss, it's like I had to come to a place of acceptance with that. And I knew within probably a day or two of finding out about it, that was going to be the key to like feeling better, was getting to a place of acceptance. But the surrender piece is like, that didn't really even cross my mind as a next step necessarily. And maybe it was, and I just didn't call it out.
Well, no, now I want to overly simplify it. It's like, is surrender the process of going from not acceptance to acceptance? Like, that process is called surrender. Like,
Maybe.
when I don't accept something and then I get to the point of accepting something, that's surrender.
I think that's what I was saying earlier, but then you were like, well, you have to have acceptance to do the surrender. So, but there was something you said earlier that made me think that maybe that was the process. So anyway, I don't want to rehash everything we've all said. If we've confused the shit out of you guys now, go back and start over at minute 2 and
I'm confused
listen
too,
again. So maybe we'll all listen again and get clear on this.
I just feel like y'all gave me another thought too.
I'm
And I
just
was
going
like,
back to the same word.
my boss would love this, but like, it's almost like a grief response. It feels like, right? We have to go through the stages of grief to get to the acceptance at the end, right? The denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and then the acceptance comes. So I wonder if surrender is that process of dealing with grief and coming to the acceptance. Yeah, I don't know. So good luck with that. Have fun. We don't claim to be the authorities. We haven't figured it out. Tell us, write in, tell us how we got it all wrong and flubbed it up and what your take on it is. We do want to do some recap, though, before we leave here. We got a comment on our Trank Dope episode from SB Dreaming that just said, thank you for this information. So that must have been very helpful. We got a comment on our Coda episode from Kate. It said, love this episode, working the Coda steps now. I related to the speaker, find myself looking for the quotes right program, and am in between Coda and Al-Anon. Maybe it's okay to be in both. Thank you, heart. So that's cool. We're telling people they don't have to be in one program. We're getting that information out there. We got a comment about our OA episode from Kim. It says, a couple weeks ago in late April, I decided I needed to explore OA. This podcast popped up. In 1.5 weeks, I have listened to it 5 times. I can totally relate to Grace. Thank you. So, thank you, Grace. Another one on our Coda episode said it was an interesting listen, which I tried to find out some more about, but didn't find a ton about. But interesting to me, at least the way I use it, is always a negative. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Because I disagree and you're wrong. So I don't know. Maybe he was using it from a better place. Got a comment back on our clarifying the clarity statement. Billy, are you an addict and alcoholic? Back episode 27, man.
Wow.
I know. And it just says great discussion.
Still hate it.
Clarity statement sucks.
It's dumb. So unimportant.
Right.
Those people have a lack of acceptance.
Okay, so another piece of feedback we got. Of course, you guys send in your donations. Thank you for everybody who does that. Of course, you can set up a one-time donation through our website, through PayPal. You can do it a recurring donation. You know, all our supporters, we appreciate that. We get to then pass that money on after it pays for the expenses of putting on a podcast, and it goes to the Recovery Sort Of Fund, right, that works in our local community. So we got to participate in helping an individual who got to take driver's education classes. They ran into this person while they were doing outreach in the community. They were living in the woods. They had a few engagements with them. That individual decided they wanted to change their life. After they went to treatment, they came out and got into a recovery house, still involved with Voices of Hope, still, trying to do this process. They got involved and active in their recovery, and they got a job at a warehouse and had visitation with their son, but they didn't have any way to get their license back or anything, or the money needed to go through the classes. And so our fund stepped up and did that. And that's fucking amazing in my mind.
Yeah.
And there is a second one. So this is the note from the recovery house peer that was asking for the assistance. So they requested funding for somebody who was a resident there. Apparently, they said they have been doing, all the required meetings a week and doing everything they need to do. And then they needed some clothing in order for them to get back into the workforce and feel better about themselves going to meetings. So we were able to also use that funding to do that. So thank you, everybody, again, for your donations. Again, recoverysortof.com. There's a thing on there that says donate somewhere. And PayPal, click it. Usually works. If it doesn't work, email me and I'll fix it like I do. Also, we just reached 70,000 total listens.
Wow.
Across our podcast. 70,163 as of right this moment. So that is a shit ton of people hearing us. Or, one person really, really obsessed. I don't know. But thank you. Either way.
So, and one final thing. So, in terms of contributing to this podcast, wanted to throw out there again that we are an Audible affiliate. So within the show notes of this episode, we will be linking to the Audible version of the book that we referenced, the Atlas of the Heart. You can click on that link and you can sign up for a totally free, no commitment necessary trial of Audible. You can take a listen to Brene Brown's book or any other book that you might find interesting. And when you do that, we do receive a monetary payout with no obligation to you guys. So
yeah. And one thing in that book that was interesting is she actually adds some things in for Audible listeners or audio listeners. She mentions in the book, she's like, hey, I know not everybody has the book in front of you. So she adds and mentions things in a slightly different way, so which is very helpful when you're listening to an audio book, because sometimes you miss references or nuances and things. And she's recognizes that in her read, and she's the one that reads it. She recognizes that in her reading of the book and notates some ways to make that experience better.
That's nice. That's nice that she reads it too, because I was just listening to another one of her books, an
which one?
Audio copy. Daring Greatly, I think. And she is not the narrator, and I was a little bummed because I just love hearing her.
That's funny, because I listened to a different book of hers, and like Billy said, she tells you in the audio version that there's like links to the stuff you would be able to get with the book, right? Like there's a quiz that goes with it and everything, which is awesome, and it's really good information. So that's cool that you still have access to it, and like she tells you to get it. But I actually don't like her voice or the way she tells stories and she does read it. And I'm like, oh, couldn't they have just got somebody else?
Well, Daring Greatly is not her, so if you want to listen to that one. But.
Yeah, I have not read Atlas of the Heart yet, but I have read 2 different books by Brene Brown, and she's a researcher. She's, got a ton of information and research to back up what she's talking about, and usually some really, really interesting and good concepts that are new ways to think about things and getting, healing, growing, less shame, like really, really positive stuff. So always support Brene Brown books.
Yeah. So we'll link to a few of them now because we've thrown a few names out there.
Yeah. Anything else you guys can think of? So go out there, accept and surrender that you love us. Send us your money to help people in the in the community.
Surrender your dollars.
Right, surrender your dollars. Accept it. No, but go out there, try to accept, try to surrender, try to see how those qualities can benefit you in your day-to-day. Like even if you just go out there and say, okay, one day I'm going to practice not surrendering and not accepting anything, and then the next day I'll see if I can practice accepting and surrendering to everything. And then, which one do you feel better at the end of the day trying to do? So do that. Keep that stuff up. Be kind to everybody. See you next week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.